Trial Lawyers University, where the Titans come to train. Produced and powered by LawPods.
Well, today we have Daniel Rodriguez with us, and Daniel and I go way, way back. So far back, I have trouble remembering how far back, but from Bakersfield. So, Daniel, how did you, out of all the places in California where people could stake roots and start a law practice, how did you settle into Bakersfield?
Well, first I got to start off and tell you that I'm originally from Texas. My family, we were migrant farm workers. The word migrant means that we followed the crops. We were always on the move from one labor camp to another labor camp to another labor camp. So that meant I attended between 3 and 5 different schools every year. My dad was illiterate. My dad never went to school, couldn't read and write in Spanish nor English. My mom only had 3rd grade education. So we were picking cotton in Texas and Arkansas, Louisiana. And my parents heard that the streets were paved with gold in California. So we started coming out to California following the crops. And there was a lot more to do here, a lot more crops to pick. So I went from cotton picking to picking almost everything else you can think of. Potatoes, tomatoes, cucumbers, peas, all kinds of fruits and all kinds of stuff. And one of the places that we stopped at was in a labor camp outside of Bakersfield that is now known as Sunset Labor Camp. Now, most of you probably have heard of or know about that labor camp. Why? Because it is, remember the John Steinbeck novel, Grapes of Wrath. It's the Okies fleeing the Dust Bowl from Oklahoma, coming here. And that labor camp is where I lived, or part of the time. And it's just south of Bakersfield. So eventually, by the time I got to high school, my parents decided to settle down and stay in one area. And this area happened to be the place where there were a lot more crops and there was more a chance to have employment, to have work throughout the year. So after I graduated from law school, I thought, I don't want to live in a big area where I have to plan my life around rush hour. If I want to go to the movie theater, I got to figure out, okay, what time should I leave? Where am I going to park? All that kind of stuff. I remember the first 2 weeks I was living in Santa Monica. I went to UCLA Law School. And I couldn't fall asleep because of all the damn traffic noise coming in through the window. And mind you, I lived on a quiet neighborhood and I just wasn't used to the big city life.
See, I can't fall asleep unless there's noise and traffic. So it's just, I guess everybody has their spot. So you went to UCLA Law School. That's quite that doesn't turn out too many trial lawyers for the plaintiff. So how did you choose UCLA out of all the law schools in the country?
Because John Wooden, I love basketball, even though I'm only 5'7". I grew up watching, well, I shouldn't say grew up. I saw John Wooden. And in fact, so much that at the age of about 35 or so, I went to John Wooden's fantasy camp at Pepperdine. It was like a 3 or 4 day event. Got there, and there's maybe 200 people, right? 200 participants. He greeted every one of us. We didn't have our name tag or anything like that. He remembered everybody's name, and he had to be in his mid-70s. He remembered everybody's name. He'd have lunch with us in the cafeteria, sit down at different tables. And he said, hey, Dan, how you doing? Now, I remember in Bakersfield, I was trying to recruit this player, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, let me tell you what happened. I'm in the 6th grade, and I'm at a school where, and we're asked to write a paragraph on what we wanted to do when we grew up, right? And, the school is right next to a labor camp where I lived. I wrote down in the paragraph, I want to get a degree in electronic engineering, which is different than electrical engineering. And then I want to go to law school. Now, mind you, I had never met an engineer. I had never met a lawyer, but I knew exactly what it is that they did through the magic of reading. And what I tell people is this, I go and talk to kids at schools, and I always tell them, through the magic of reading, I had sat at the round table with King Arthur. Through the magic of reading, I had visited one of the 7 rings around Saturn. Through the magic of reading, I was at the OK Corral in Tombstone at the shootout. I knew exactly what all those things meant, even though I had never visited them. through the magic of reading. And that's why I knew exactly how it is or what it is that a lawyer did and an engineer did. And I even picked the schools. I wanted to go to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, which is the #1 rated public engineering school in the country. And that's where I went. And then UCLA was at that time was in the top 10. And John Wooden had already retired, but Larry Brown was there. And so I decided to go there.
While you were in law school, did you take any classes like trial ad or moot court or mock trial things to help prepare you for the stage of the courtroom?
Yes, I took a trial advocacy class. It wasn't all that helpful.
No, glad to hear that because I skipped all those. I'm like, this sounds like a bunch of nonsense. But I think it would have been at least helpful. My girlfriend does mock trial, and so she's very into it. And we practice and we coach, and so she's, but it's good because it teaches you get to go out there, put yourself up in front of people, start dealing with those nerves, all that kind of stuff. So I could see the value of the mock trial.
I had better training. You want to hear about it?
Why not? This is a podcast with Danny Rodriguez. So let's see how you got to, from picking to whatever the hell you're picking to the king of was it the Central Valley, Bakersfield? What do they call that?
Yeah, Central Valley, San Joaquin Valley.
I said telling my buddy, Eric Wilson, because I'm going to do a podcast with him tomorrow. And I was telling him about, they were coming out. He's, I love Dan. It was my teacher at Spence, and he's the king of the Central Valley of law firms. So
okay. Well, it's nice of him to say that. But here's the training I got. I told you that we would go from place to place, lived in about at least 5 different places every year. So I'd get to a new school. There would be a student walking across the quad, coming over to greet me. And I had to find out exactly, read the person. Is he a bully that's coming over to establish his dominance over the new kid? Or was it somebody who was coming over to befriend me? And I was a little guy. I still am a little guy, right? And I had to learn how to talk my way out of things and talk my way into things. At the time, I didn't even know what this word meant. Rapport. I had to build rapport, okay? And I struggled with all this because I didn't start school until I was 8. There was no kindergarten in my generation. And I didn't speak a word of English. So I had to study English and learn English. And it threw me for a loop because I was very literal. It's like, why do they call it rush hour if nobody's moving? Why do they call it hard rock? Isn't that a stone? What does that have to do with music? And I remember asking one of my teachers at school, why this thing about silent letters? Why bother it? Why bother she goes, well, there's a concept of phonetics and, you try to learn it, but never mind that. So then I went to the library. Obviously, there was no internet at the time. So I'd go to the school library. I spent a lot of time in the school library. And I looked up the word phonetic, and I couldn't find it. I went back to my teacher, and I said, I can't find the word phonetic. Got the dictionary out, and she found it, and she handed it to me. And I looked at it, and the goddamn word started with PH instead of F. Phonetic, they don't even spell phonetic the right way. Now, the reason that's important for us is that our choice of words matters, whether it be voir dire, whether it be opening, whether it be closing. Words matter. Word choice matters. And if you're literal like me, you pay attention to words. Do you use the word deny when you're asking for a life care plan? Are you going to deny this? Is that a more powerful word than are you going to give? All those kinds of little things I pay attention to. Not because, it's because of the way I grew up. And then engineering is very precise. Engineering, my first year of law school, I struggled because I was used to taking an engineering test, calculus, differential equations. And you would go through 3 pages of calculations and there would only be one correct answer. Somewhere along the way, you may have screwed up and not gotten to the correct answer. I get to law school and they ask the question, Party A is driving down the road. Party B pulls out from a stop sign, forcing Party A into the fire hydrant. The same thing Party B is with a rifle looking at Party A and he pulls the trigger. Please tell us who is responsible for the tort committed against Party A. And I would go through and get the answer in Party C or whatever. No, that's not the right answer. The right answer is, what is the majority view? What is the minority rule? What's the rule? What's the issue? Blah, blah, blah. It took me an entire year to figure that out. Once I figured that out, I never went to class my second and third year, except for finals. And show up for I worked in a law firm 60, 70 hours a week. And that's where I learned about law.
What kind of law firm?
An insurance defense firm, downtown LA. The name of it was Chase, Rochford, Drucker, and Bogus. And the reason I got hired there, like at every law firm I applied, is because of my engineering background. I could figure out what questions to ask an expert, which most people who go to law school major in what? Their undergrad.
Poli-sci.
Political science, English, history. And I'm not knocking those. That's interesting. But is it all that useful when we're cross-examining coefficient of friction, trajectory, metallurgy?
Not much that we learn in college or law school is very useful to actually practicing law.
Yeah.
So the default answer is no.
Yeah. For me, undergrad was great. So because I learned a lot about science, obviously. And in the kind of business that we're in, personal injury, you use it all the time. Whether it's medicine. Did you take organic chemistry in undergrad, Dan?
Nope. Not even in high school. I took one round of chemistry, one semester. I'm like, doctor is out of the picture because this stuff smells bad and makes me nauseous.
And then living in Los Angeles, Santa Monica, what's the next language that you probably should have studied in school if you knew you were going to come out to Los Angeles?
I'm going to go with Spanish.
Vegas.
I'm going to go with Spanish. Right. See? And I didn't move out to Los Angeles till I was 45, so I didn't know. We didn't back
That's
in
just
Detroit.
An excuse, Dan.
Not as many Latinos. What are you gonna do? I tried though. I tried to study Spanish, and I got to hola and como está, but I need more work. But I gotta immerse myself.
And speaking of Latinos, Happy Cesar Chavez Day.
Yes, I was just remembering the Happy Cesar Chavez Day to you and to all Latinos.
And I was
Everybody.
a UFW. Do you know what UFW stands for? United Farm Workers Union. Cesar Chavez started the UFW. I was an organizer, labor organizer for the UFW.
What year?
1972, 73, somewhere around there.
I was 5 years old.
I got shoes older than you, Dan.
I know. Because just so everybody knows, you're 71 years old. That gives context to the conversation because you look so young. It throws people off. So you see what I'm saying? It's confusing. Let's look at your career. You get out of law school, UCLA. Tell us about your first gig out of law school. Because, there's a lot of people get out of law school these days. And, there's so many options. Do we go work at a defense firm, plaintiff's firm? Do we hang a shingle? How do we figure out this thing called being a lawyer to make money? How do we do all this?
During my second year of law school, which I didn't go to law school, I was working.
You were working, right.
But during the summer, I wanted to come home. So there was a very prominent law firm here in town, and it was Good Friday because it was an Easter break. I wasn't about to miss work or too much work, so I just drove out down here or up here from LA. I knocked on a couple of doors. One was an insurance defense firm because I didn't want to do insurance defense work after I graduated from law school, but it was a good gig during the meet, right? And they said no, they didn't want me. First time I'd been turned down asking for a job because my engineering background said, we want you. Then I went to the plaintiff's firm. And the plaintiff's firm, it was around 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Came in and asked the receptionist, hey, my name is so-and-so. I want to know if I can talk to somebody about a job here as a law clerk. And she said, well, hold on a minute. Everybody was gone. It was Good Friday. It was in the afternoon. And she comes back and she says, the senior partner will see you. Okay. So I go back there and he interviews me for about 2 hours. Asked me about anything and everything. And one of the things he said, I'm about to start a trial, which, by the way, he never went to trial, but, I'm about to start a trial. How do I get this into evidence? I want to get it into evidence. And I said to him, you're not going to get into evidence. He says, what do you mean? I said, well, evidence code 352, you'll never get these pictures in. And he says, well, how do you know that? I said, because I write memos for the senior partners at the insurance defense firm. He says, okay, here's an oil field accident, where somebody got hurt. Can you tell me how this works? I said, sure. Let me tell you how it works. He says, how do you know that? I said, 2 reasons. 1, engineering background. Number 2, I worked out in the oil fields. I was a roustabout and a mechanic out in the oil fields. I also bust dishes. I also worked in a paint store. I did a bunch of things before I ever did any of this. So
lawyer wasn't your first job, Daniel?
It wasn't. You want to know what my first job was?
Picking something somewhere.
Picking cotton at the age of 5 in the Texas Panhandle. I don't think they do that in Detroit.
No, no, the weather is not appropriate. So you get a job at this plaintiff's firm with this senior
Yes.
partner?
And then I come back after I graduated from law school. And, they had me here for the job. Took the bar in July of 1980. My year took the longest to tell us the result. It was the first year of, I call it the practical exam. I think it's called performance exam now.
That was really difficult.
Yeah. And we didn't find out until mid-December whether or not we passed. And back then there was no internet or anything
Really?
like that.
There wasn't an internet?
So you had a choice. Well, we still had dinosaurs roaming out on the streets.
Yeah.
Here in Bakersfield, That's how old I am. So there was two ways to find out whether you passed the bar. One, you waited for another extra 5 days for a letter from the state bar, or you could get in a car and drive to LA to the Daily Journal office. And what they did is they would paste all in a computer printout, all of the people who passed. So a buddy of mine and I, we drove down there, got there, and as you can imagine, all these people are walking down there to the location. So we had to park like 5 blocks away, walk our way up there, and you can hear people going, yay! And you can hear, oh my God, And so I elbowed my way up to the front, so to the window to look at, and I looked through it. I didn't see my name. I went back and I sat down on the curb, and people around me were shouting. I don't know what made me do it, but I got up and I went back and I elbowed my way through it and looked through it. I'll be damned, my name is there. How did I miss it the first time? So anyway, when I got the letter from California State Bar to sign up and get sworn in, I did it like that because I was afraid they might figure out they made a mistake and I really hadn't passed the bar. So within 30 days of getting sworn in, I did my first jury trial.
But at the law firm, where did you get you got a gig?
Yes. And it was a DUI because I grew up doing civil PI, criminal defense, and immigration law. But the last criminal trial I tried was maybe 2012, I think it was. I stopped doing criminal. I enjoyed criminal more than I did civil. There was always a villain. There was always a human interest story in the criminal case. Civil case, they are, but you got to work harder at finding them.
To find the betrayal. So that was your first trial was a DUI. How many trials would you estimate you've completed at this stage?
At least 150, made up of criminal, civil, more civil than criminal, federal, state, different states. I've done my share of trials.
Out of all 150 trials, which one are you most, I guess, proud of? You know what I mean? Where's pride or most man, this was the culmination of years of studying and skills and learning that I was able to get this result in this case, and that I feel that, because of everything I put into being in learning and being a great plaintiff's lawyer, this was a culmination of my efforts. This masterpiece.
Actually, it was a criminal case. The case went something like this. It was a bailiff, and he was accused of, they had to drive from the main jail out to a courthouse out in the country, a small town. And at that particular courthouse, in order to bring in the inmates from one location into court for arraignment or pretrial or whatever it may be, there was 2 doors and there was a space in between. The reason that's important to know is that all the other spaces had cameras, but not that location. And my client was accused of groping a female inmate. Okay. So he was charged with sex. Oh, and they found his saliva in her bra cup, and they found his DNA on her breast and chest. And there was a history of 7 other female inmates that fit the same profile, physical profile, that had accused him of doing the same thing. He happened to be a big guy, African-American. So that was the facts, the evidence against my client. So we put on the trial, and I did a number of things. This is way before I went to GSCM, TLC, and so forth, right? And I just told my story, and I put the defendant on trial. And make a long story short, the jury came back with a not guilty verdict. And I thought the biggest reason for that is my cross-examination of the complaining witness. I also put on a PI lawyer who was representing her in the civil lawsuit she had filed against the county. Oh, and the DA was a ex-military guy, ramrod straight, and Oh, they found my client guilty on all the felony counts, and they they found him guilty of a misdemeanor. I didn't handle the appeal. The state public defender did. And it was reversed for prosecutorial misconduct because every day I'd make a motion for mistrial because he was just off the rails. Fifth District Court of Appeals reversed for prosecutorial misconduct on that misdemeanor.
Complete victory.
Yes, it felt that way. My client was married to a woman who was graduated from the same high school I did, and her family lived in that same little town that my parents lived in. So I wanted to do something good for him and for the entire family.
Got it. So let me switch gears here and talk to you about this character named David Clark, because we kind of have
You
him.
know that character?
I know that character. So, because when I asked you about mentors, you said I don't really have one, except for maybe David Clark. He has informed a little bit of how I proceed. So, what have you learned from David Clark that instructs or influences on how you prosecute your personal injury cases these days?
People ask me all the time, who's your mentor? And I'll give them the same answer I gave you earlier.
Dan Ambrose.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes. Besides Dan.
You didn't even say Ambrose. Let's say Dan. Oh, Dan Ambrose. Okay,
I really haven't had mentors in the sense that I just the way I grew up, it's just self-reliant, and people say
difficult. Don't listen to authority figures.
Yeah,
do your own thing.
Do this.
It's hard to get a mentor when you know everything, Daniel.
Do you know how to do this? We go out to a new job out in the farm fields, and the farmer would say, "Well, picking grapes will pay $1.40 an hour, but if you can drive the tractor to pull the boxes full of grapes, that pays $2 an hour. Do you know how to drive a tractor and pull a sled?" Yeah. I never driven that tractor. But so you learn to think on your feet and figure things out. So that's how I grew up. But I have to say, the person that comes closest to it is David Clark. So here, let me answer your question. The biggest thing I learned from him was the betrayal story. That juiced up the verdicts, because if you try a case of negligence, two things might happen. You'll either get a low verdict or you get defensed. Why? And this is what I learned from David, is what do we do with people who make mistakes in our lives?
Forgive.
We forgive them, right? What do we do with people who betray us?
Punish.
Yeah, we want revenge. So if we try a case of negligence, the verdict's going to be like that. But if you try the case as a betrayal story, the verdict is going to be this. So that is the biggest takeaway from David.
And from David, I think we understand the definition of betrayal is the trusted relationship intentionally broken for the wrong reason. It's interesting too, because David Clark also would fall high up there in my world of mentors, because I met him during Spence's last trial in Iowa. And my meeting of him was very I was with Gary Hazelton, and I just got picked up. I was at a TLC regional. And I'm sitting in the back seat, and I'm telling Gary about what I just learned from Ray Foreman on voir dire, and I'm all excited. And Clark turns around, looks at me, he goes, and I just met the guy. He goes, "Would you mind shutting the fuck up? I got a splitting headache, and the sound of your voice is making it worse." I was like, well, now since you asked me like that, of course I'll shut the fuck up. So that was my, it was a little off there, but then we went and watched the trial in Iowa. I think I saw you there in Des Moines, Iowa.
In fact, when you said that, I said, I went to the opening statement and the closing argument.
Right, because it was like a month-long trial, or a month and a half.
Yeah.
And so him and I just met. We're outside talking about what Spence was doing. And he's kind of explaining to me what the rhetoric that Spence is using and how brilliant it is, and his tribe joining stuff. And then he's like, tell me a little about one of your criminal voir dires. And, because I don't really do criminal because there's no money in it. And I'm like, so I gave him my presumption of innocence voir dire. And he's like, that shit work for you? I'm like, I lost 2 out of the last 100 trials. He goes, any idea why it works? I'm like, no. He goes, when you can make the unconscious conscious, you're going to be fucking dangerous. In the civil world, we call that rich. And of course, I didn't realize he was manipulating me at the time, because of course I'm basically struggling to make $60,000 a year. So I'm just barely hanging on. I'm like, I like to be rich, man. I'm killing myself out here. So then he helped me with the civil rights trial, and I tried with my buddy Steve King, in 2013, around there. But anyway, so that I actually got a good verdict, like $100,000 verdict. I was like, oh my God, this is great. California's great, these civil rights cases. But anyways, that's how we got to know each other. And he really, I spent a lot of time with him out there in Omaha, learning from him. And anyways, so that was, and he's, I remember like when all the studying I was doing with him, and he's like, Dan, one day you'll have students. I'm like, what the hell would I ever teach anybody? And then anyways, but now him and I, he's coming to Huntington Beach. He's going to be very excited to know you're coming. He's like, Danny, it's going to be so great because we're teaching, he's got to be creative. So his workshops that he teaches it, because he teaches like half-day workshops on the stuff that, he taught with you. It's called the dark arts. And so, but it is the most popular, it's for sure the most popular workshop we have at TLU. It's like his classes get sold out within a week of them becoming available. And we're doing a boot camp, these 4-day trainings that a couple of your associates are coming out here today, to do it with Satch Oliver and John Romano. But we're doing one for like 15 students the 4 days before Huntington Beach. So those students will be 4 days with Dave Clark and myself, learning the structure and rhetoric from Clark and better performance and presentation from me and, Giorgio. And I'm really stoked about it. And because just like he's influenced your life, he's influenced my life, and he has a chance to influence, this knowledge, so many people, how they see things. Because until you see things, this job is very challenging. When you start to see things, it gets a little easier.
Well, Dave Clark is the real deal.
Yes. And it's a little bit difficult to deal with at times, but we have to make exceptions for our creative geniuses. Not everybody can be friendly and easy to get along with like you and I, Daniel.
You're right. But the thing about Dave Clark, I love the guy. You get past all the...
right.
Right. Once you get past that, the guy's a softie. Okay. So every time I'm out in the Midwest, I try to make it a point to fly into Omaha and have dinner with him and then come back, just to catch up with him.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
The highlight of TLU for me was having the opportunity to network with attorneys from out of state.
TLU has been amazing. I'm so glad I came. It was one of the most inspiring events I've been to. Great networking, great food. It's been amazing. I can't wait for next year.
But speaking of Huntington Beach, Daniel, since I've known you, and I've known you a long time, because if you and I, either we first met in the case you were working with Blanco, or I came up there with Connell Doyle, and we tried that case, that paraplegic case, and we did some focus groups at your office. But it's been a solid 10 plus years.
At least 15.
No, a solid number. And, and you've attended, how many TLU events have you been? I know you were at the last one in Vegas. And what else?
TLU,
Trial Lawyers University.
Only one.
That's just that one in Vegas? That was the first one?
Yeah. And I think the Trojan Horse I went to.
You went to a few of those. Even did my witness prep one, which I'm very excited about, going down to a law firm in Texas in May to do a 2-day workshop boot camp. Because I think witness preparation for every young lawyer, that's the most important skill they can learn, is how to prepare that witness for deposition. So they really learn that client's story so that they're really connected with the client. And then the client really remembers and relives their own story so they can tell it. Because most people that have been traumatically injured repress everything, right? And they become more robotic about it, so they don't have to feel the pain again. But if they don't ever go back into that pain, we can't expect the jury to compensate them for it if nobody can feel it. So, but along those lines, I've been inviting Daniel to speak at TLU for many years, and I always text this time I text him, hey, Daniel, do you want to speak at TLU? I know the answer is no, but I just thought I'd ask anyways. And by all miracles of miracles, that no turned into, I got something I got to share. Finally, I think the thing is you didn't have anything you wanted to share before. Now you've got it. So
first of all, it was reverse psychology. You said no. Right. I did not capital letters, so I fell for it.
I learned that from Clark.
No, actually, let me tell you why. I recognize that one of my many faults is that I am overly sensitive to racism. And the reason for that is when I was a kid, I don't know how old, 5, 6 years old, living in the Texas Panhandle. And I've lived in a lot of different places. And my dad, for some reason, said, you want to go into town? I'll buy you a hamburger. That was like... never happened. And it's like, I get in the pickup truck and we drive into a little town. I think the name of the town was Sundown, Texas. Sundown. Probably population 1,000 or something. Drove in and we park in front of the diner. I get out of the pickup and I make a beeline to the front door. Before I get there, my dad stops me. He says, "We can't go in there." Oh, why not? He says, "See that sign over there?" And mind you, my dad couldn't read, but I remember it. The sign was, maybe 15 inches tall and maybe 2 feet, 3 feet long. Blue perimeter with blue letters against a white background. And it said, "No Mexicans served here." Okay. That probably had the most profound impact on how I view the world for the rest of my life. So let me give you one snippet before I get to your comment about TLU. I remember here in Bakersfield, maybe 20 years ago, watching a TV ad for a local politician. He's sitting there and he's surrounded by little kids. "Vote for me, da 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 da." And I looked at it, and then I went to my friends and family members, at least 10 of them, probably more. And I said, "Do you see anything different about that ad?" "No." "Are you sure?" "No." Went to somebody else. "No." I said, "There isn't a single brown face. All those little kids are all little white kids. And we live in a community back then where at least 40% of the population was Latino." So I view the world differently, I think, than most people. And maybe not in a good way, right? Yeah. So when I look at a program like TLU or any other, and I look at the presenters, and I don't see not very many brown faces, I tell myself, it was a revelation to me. I shouldn't be bitching about it if I say no every time Dan calls me. If I want to change the world, I better do something about it rather than just bitch about it, complain about it. So I thought, especially in a place like California, with Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, and we have a program like this where if you check out the plaintiffs, the ones that go to trial, you'll see that probably half of them are Latino, if not more. So why the hell don't we have brown faces on a program? So that was the biggest reason I said yes to you this time. I don't know if I got too personal, but that's the answer.
Well, you are correct on those things, and I'm working on it. But but it is, I can only invite people, you know what I mean? And I have to have people that present who have accomplished things. Otherwise, it doesn't work, right?
Yeah. And I'm not blaming you, Dan. Like I said, I blame myself. You were asking me for years. And I kept saying, no, I don't know. And I said, I shouldn't be complaining about it. I'm part of the problem. Now I want to be part of the solution.
Great. We're very excited to have you being part of the solution because, you've been accomplishing quite a few things in the courtrooms, both, in California and around the country. And also, I know you're a teacher. I mean, how many lawyers work at Rodriguez?
I have 10 lawyers working with me.
Right. And, more than most, more than me, almost all invest tremendously in, your people by sending them to conference. It's like, it blows my mind when people, have these firms and they're trying to be better and better, yet they don't want to invest in their people. They don't want to send anybody to conference. They don't want to learn anything new. I'm like, because then it's just like they stuck to me. Like, if you don't keep learning new stuff, then you just become a cog in a machine and you don't grow and you can't be inspired by people you've never met. Right? I mean, part of going to a live conference is to meet the people of your status, but also people who are in their 30s who are getting verdicts, right? That are, have worked the system. So they're not waiting till they're in their 50s and 60s. They're able to get there faster because they have access to the information now. It's all available from the greatest trial lawyers who are actually teaching how they're doing stuff instead of just showboating on stages looking to get cases like this, with so many conferences are. I mean, if you give somebody 15 minutes to talk, what can they do? They can't do anything. But if you give them some time, especially people who are qualified to teach, and that's why, I really, excited and proud of it at TLU because there's so many choices every day at TLU, even at the small conference. Like in Vegas, there was like 9 lecture tracks and 15 workshops. This one's much smaller. There's only 4 lecture tracks and 8 workshops, but still everybody's choosing to be in a certain spot and learning what they need to know. And that's what's, because I don't know what people need. You don't know what people need. They know what their shortcomings are. And everybody's trying to fill up those shortcomings because nobody wants to be a loser. Everybody wants to win, at least at some level. And so that's why I'm excited you're coming this year, Daniel. And you're teaching about opening statement. And
I am.
Because that's what I really want to talk about is the opening statement that, what are you going to teach? Because we got Ben Rabinowitz coming. He's teaching about cross-examination, a one-day masterclass. I don't know if you know Ben or not, but do you know Ben?
I know of him.
Oh, he's great.
He's from New York,
yeah,
right?
You're going to really like him. He's just
and he's a fabulous lawyer from everything I've seen and heard.
Equally good human being, nicest guy, such a good person. I'm excited that he's coming out because he was out in Vegas and taught there. And the first time I met him was when I did a TLU New York City. That was very challenging. New York's a big, very challenging place to do business. They're not really open to outside ideas. It's crazy. Like they've never heard of so many concepts that we take for granted. Like the apple pie voir dire. I showed them like, oh my God, that's brilliant. I'm like, I'd like to take credit for it because it is pretty solid rhetoric, but I can't. So what are you going to be sharing about? Because you have two 2-hour blocks. This was part of the contract. Is that I'm coming there. I need some. He didn't say that really. I'm messing with you. I said, Daniel Rodriguez, if this was the Daniel Rodriguez show and you had the chance to share what you need, what do you need? He said, I need 2 2-hour blocks. Maybe he said 3 2-hour blocks. So let's start with 2 2-hour.
Well, I want to talk about opening statement and the way I approach it. One of the things that I hear all the time from all kinds of presenters, the conventional wisdom is your opening statement can't be more than 30 minutes long, right? And you hear statistics like this. The conventional wisdom is that an opening statement, it shouldn't be more than 30 minutes. Well, the attention span of a goldfish is 9 seconds or less. And guess what? The human attention span is now the same as a goldfish. So you can't possibly keep somebody's attention for more than 20 minutes, 30 minutes tops. They're probably right. But my opening statements, I think the shortest one I've given in the last 10 years was maybe 1 hour and 15 minutes. The longest one I've given is 2 hours long. And the one I'm going to give in a trial that I'm starting is going to be like 1 hour and 45 minutes long.
What kind of trial is that?
It's against the cops. Local cops going code 3. My client pulls out of his driveway, gets T-boned at 52 miles an hour, gets hurt. I said, well, the sirens were on, the overhead lights, everybody else saw him, everybody else heard him, and you're such an idiot for pulling out. It's all your fault. We're exempted, right? We're exempted from following the law once we do the code 3. And we were going to save a damsel in distress. A young lady was calling in and saying, my God, this black man's trying to break into my apartment. He's screaming, oh my God, he jumped over the fence. Please, please save me. How can we ever get mad? How can we ever turn the officer into a villain when he's writing to save a damsel in distress? And they're going to get all that in evidence. Oh, and then my client they found an empty beer can in the back of his pickup truck. Oh, and they smell odor of alcohol on him. It's not going to be a walk in the park then.
Well, that's why you got good case framing and good structure of betrayal. So opening statement, though, because people have a lot of choices. So if they want to learn about opening statements, what are they going to get from Daniel Rodriguez?
First of all, if you're going to tell long opening statement, when I say long, more than 30 minutes long, how do you do that? And is it a good idea? In most cases, it is a good idea. It's about sequencing, but how do you tell? Dan, have you ever read a novel that was this thick and you couldn't put it down?
I imagine I have, but it's been a while since I've done any reading.
And why? How is it that somebody can read such a big book or watch such a long movie and still stay there until the end?
I know. Story trance.
Yes. And the second part of it is what? This is what I tell people. What's that old Indian proverb? How do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
One bite at a time. Okay. Same thing, whether it's a movie, whether it's a book, it's chapters. In each chapter, you have to tell the audience, Now I'm finished with that. Now let me tell you about what happened. Now let me tell you about, I'm finished with that. It's that easy. If you're doing a movie, you just put a black screen or you just go to the next scene to the ranch. And the next one is in the saloon, whatever. Same thing when you're telling a story. You have to have transitions and your words have to be sequenced. So that's the first thing we learn, or that I would like to teach, is transitions and chapters. Do you always introduce the villain first before you even talk about the plaintiff? Most of the time you do. When do you talk about the plaintiff before you talk about what happened? What considerations should you take into account when that happens? Should you have, and this is what David Clark teaches, or he used to teach, is you give a movie trailer to put it in context, right? We go to the movies and we see a preview, a trailer, and it shows tanks and explosions and machine gun fire. And we're sitting there thinking, hey, it's a war movie, right? And then once we start watching the movie, everything supports that conclusion that we made. We see on the screen a bunch of women having tea, having lunch and laughing and so forth, and then a date and then music. Oh, that's a chick flick. Okay. So you tell the movie trailer, the context, you set it. So now everything, all the information the viewer, the listener receives supports that, whatever conclusion they came to begin with, as to what type of case or what type of movie or what type of novel it is. So those are movie trailer. Then you got to set up the next chapter, not necessarily always in this order, but the beauty about chapters, you can move them around. You test drive them with a focus group. You say, oh, in this case, I got to introduce the plaintiff before I tell what happened, which is counterintuitive after David Ball, right? David Ball says, hey, don't even mention your plaintiff until after you tell him what happened, right? And that's true most of the time, but there's exceptions to that. The last case I tried last year, I introduced the plaintiff before I told him what happened. Why? And by the way, here's what my tentative plan is to do, is that at this TLU event. And thank you for inviting me and being so persistent, Dan.
One thing people know about Dan, we don't give up easily. Persistence. Wait, did Clark call that the meta story or the pre-story, that tagline?
He called it, I think, both. Meta story and then the pre-story.
Okay.
That's what he called it. Okay. I call it the movie trailer.
Fair enough. This is the Danny Rodriguez show, not the Dave Clark show. We're going to call it the movie trailer.
No, and I learned that from David. You asked me earlier, who had the most influence? It would be people would be David Clark. But the concepts, what I learned from Jerry Spence, maybe not personally, but his whole approach, tribe building, reflective.
Well, David did learn from Jerry, though, too.
Yes.
So, he was mentored for like 20 years. So he's got a little advantage. So we can probably see a little crossover here. Whoops, knocked the microphone over. Getting a little too dramatic over here. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Anyway, so this case that I tried in Iowa, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably preview it and tell some things to look for, and then give the opening statement, show the slides I use, how I use them. And just briefly, it's a case where the defense story went something like this. The defense story went, the plaintiff is an 18-year-old girl who was driving in heavy, dense fog, speeding without her headlights on and on Snapchat. And yes, our semi made a left-hand turn in front of her. And yes, she got hurt. And yes, her skull got broken in 100 different places. But 5 months after this happened, she started at the University of Iowa in college. And her first semester, she got straight A's. And she graduated from University of Iowa in not 5 years, not 4.5 years, but in 4 years with a GPA of 3.08. She is now a personal trainer. She works out with her clients, and she does 2 workouts just for herself. And she runs 8 to 10 miles every day. And next year, in the next 12 months or so, her boyfriend, her fiance, she's going to get married on the beach somewhere. So that's the defense story. Okay. So needless to say, it was a hotly disputed liability case.
How'd you get involved in the case out in Iowa?
One of my partners, the one that has the most, he's originally from Iowa. And this girl's dad lived in a little town close to the little town that my colleague here grew up in. It's a little town by the name of Anamosa. You know that Americana, the pitchfork,
Yeah.
two elderly. The painter lives in Anamosa, or lived. He passed away, right? You know, so he hired a local counsel out there who did mostly insurance defense. Good lawyer, but did some plaintiff's work. But after a year or so, he asked us to come in and do the trial, and we said okay. And it didn't turn out bad for the client, nor for us.
So obviously, we have to all ask now, what was the verdict?
The verdict was $35 million, the biggest verdict, motor vehicle crash verdict in the Iowa state history. There was 21% contrib, and we settled against confidentially against a trailer manufacturer.
And so you have to practice in the deposition. You practice in motion hearings. You practice at the grocery store. That's why you have a family. You practice on them. You have to keep the skill up or it erodes. It's simple as that.
Somebody give us an overview of this case.
Or I call wowing it. And what I mean by wisdom of the wise is, why are we still right in spite of this fact?
These are just some of the clips when I was cross-examining 10 years ago, remember that.
About 11 o'clock at night, and he leaves this message. I got a brilliant idea. Every conversation he starts, I have a brilliant idea.
But welcome, everybody. We've got a good crowd here today.
That was your last trial. You got to get back into the courtroom. I mean, it's been a year.
Well,
a year?
something happened. A little hiccup happened along the way, Dan. I don't know that you know about it. I had open heart surgery about 2.5 months ago.
Well, then you have a good excuse.
Cracked my chest open, and they did the quadruple bypass.
Well, I didn't know. Well,
so my trials got continued.
That was you know what? It was nice. The defense stipulated, or they make you file a motion and show pictures.
No, I called up the defense lawyers and I said,
I'm just kidding. So that is a heck of a result. So Daniel, what would you say, out of all the skill sets you have, what would you say is your superpower, the thing you're best at in this world?
In the courtroom, I think it's just knowing how to talk to and with people, being respectful, just treating people with respect, regardless of whether they're the villain, especially the villain, or whether they're the plaintiff, and everybody else in between. We disagree vehemently inside, but I don't let it come out. Every once in a little bit it comes out, but I try not to let it come out. And it's just you treat people with respect and dignity, and it's the jurors who are looking at. Something that I stole from a student at the ranch was when you were hating on the witness, I was hating on you. When you were loving on the witness, I was loving on you. Jurors will identify with the witness long before they identify with the lawyer. So that doesn't mean you don't cross-examine and get down to the bare bones of their lies.
Right? We're not giving them a free pass just because we don't want to cost it.
Right. I'm simply saying you do it with respect. Okay. Instead of being, and didn't you? No, at the best you look confused. But 2 witnesses saw you pull the trigger. Right? I suppose. Well, isn't it true that 2 witnesses saw you pull the trigger? There's a difference. And probably, at least in my view, the confused one is probably more effective.
Like cross-examination is something that I read a lot about, and obviously as a criminal defense lawyer, because I think I probably tried around maybe 175 jury trials before I left Michigan. And a lot of my early 2-3 days, domestic violence, DUI, retail fraud, shoplifting, a lot of nonsense cases, some more serious, but cross is like a real skill. And I think everything that's done in the courtroom, there is a best practices for, okay? It doesn't matter what your personality is. It doesn't matter what your gender is. It doesn't matter because everything's, it's got to be yourself. Of course it has to be yourself, but you still have to know what the best practices are.
And you have to be the best version of yourself. I know some folks who are just hard to love on,
Yes.
right?
Right.
So I always say, no, if you're an asshole, I don't want you to be yourself.
Be somebody's likable.
I want you to be the best version of yourself. The one that your mom raised and said, son, don't do this. Don't do that. This is the way you do it. That's the version I think should be in the courtroom.
Daniel, you've had quite the successful career, but if there's anything that you could go back and change about it or redo or a loss that you wish you could correct, would there be anything, what comes to mind?
I heard somebody say this to me. You can be good at your craft, specifically trial work, and be a great husband, be a great dad. I disagree, especially when you start out. You don't know much. So you have to spend an inordinate amount of time learning stuff, teaching yourself stuff, going to seminars, learning from other people. Is it possible to be very good at your craft, being a very good trial lawyer, and being a great dad and a great husband? I'm sure it can be, but for most of us ordinary humans, I don't think that's possible. So early on, you almost have to, that doesn't mean you are a terrible dad or a terrible husband. You're just not as good as maybe you want to be. You're not going to have the time. If you're in trial in LA or Portland or wherever, by the way, I killed myself. I even chartered, back then, I would charter private planes to fly me back to my kids' school activity, the award ceremony or whatever. Did I make every ceremony? Every game? No. Would I have made all those if maybe I dialed it back a notch and not be as fanatical about what I do? Probably. I just lucked out that my ex-wife turned out to be a great mom and raised my kids in a way that I'm proud to say that I have the privilege of being their dad.
That's a good response. I'm not sure, but let me ask you this, because along those lines of the hard work, but what advice would you give to a young lawyer? Because it's, like my nephew's been a lawyer for less than a year. Sometimes I feel like I'm talking to him, but it's not connecting very well because it's not coming from maybe the right source. But somebody came to you, a young lawyer, just got his bar card. I say, hey, you know what? You've been so successful, and I really want to be successful as a trial lawyer, but there's just so much out there. I don't know what to do. What advice would you give that person?
If you want to be a trial lawyer, you got to get in the courtroom. And in today's world, that's hard to do doing plaintiff's work. The best way, I think, is to try criminal cases. Go work at the public defender's office for a couple of years. I'm not saying if you want to, you can make a career. But if that's not what you want to do, you want to do plaintiff's civil work, then you get into the courtroom and, like you pointed out, try a shoplifting case, try resisting arrest, PC 148, and so forth, public intoxication. These little trials get you on your feet in front of a jury. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is you just got to immerse yourself. And by immerse yourself, that means, and now it's a lot easier. You can watch TLU on demand. You can watch Courtroom View Network, whatever. There's a lot of things that you can do.
You can come to TLU skills training boot camps and get on your feet and get recorded and get feedback and learn how to make proper eye contact, control your facial expressions.
Yes.
And because being a trial lawyer is, you're a performer. You are a courtroom performer. And if you don't understand that this is somebody, like when I coach and teach, somebody's like, oh, this is like acting for trial lawyers. I'm like, bravo, it is a little bit like acting, but you have to know your story so well that it becomes congruent with who you are. And that's why it's so important to spend that time with the client so that their story can almost radiate through you as you speak, as like an oracle for their story. So I think that's critical. Well, Daniel, one thing before we go is that I end all of my programs the same way. And that is because I've worked on a lot of things, as you know, over the years, as far as teaching and coaching and training. But the thing that I think is the best thing that I've created for immediate results is this chapter on cross-examination of the defense medical expert. Because I think it teaches the skills, it teaches a little strategy, but the skills of cross, which I believe the key skills of cross are, obvious ones like leading questions only, one new fact per question, looping or a double direct, whatever you want to call it, which is establish a fact and repeat that fact in the next question. Those are basics, I think. But cross-examining in the present tense. So it forces you to visualize what you're talking about, forces the witness to, but also, more important, the jury or the audience can actually visualize the story. To drop the taglines like right, correct, isn't it true, true, or if you have to use them for your own comfort or because the court requires you, to allow some gap in time, some pause, like doctor, instead of doctor, you're board certified, true, being doctor, you're board certified, true. So that space of time allows the mind to process the information, to drop all the filler words like and, so, okay, because people do that and they'll do it their whole career until they intentionally force themselves and train themselves to stop it and just be comfortable with that silence and to breathe. Pacing and breathing. People speak too rapidly, most people on cross. If you watch it on CBS, Sue's cross, they're not breathing. If you pause, get some air in, that's going to help both the volume of your voice and so you don't trail off and you don't speed up trying to finish before you breathe. To effectively use a flip chart. And what do I mean by that? I mean to write legibly and to put one topic per page to effectively use a flip chart. To be intentional, like you were saying with our emotional states. Instead of getting, most people get aggressive. As soon as they cross, they get aggressive. But I think there's really two dominant emotions of cross. One is curiosity and the other is disappointment. Of course, laying foundations is curiosity and of impeachments. The bias, that's the disappointment that they would come here and attempt to deceive us. So those, I think, are the core skills. So I drafted this piece of cross called the Defense Medical Expert Cross. And I'm excited about it because it really lays out the right way versus the wrong way. And it can be adjusted for any kind of witness. So are you ready, Dr. Rodriguez? So I'm just going to make the statements. And you're just going to basically say yes. People are like, oh, that's what a real witness does. I'm like, I realize that. But if you have the pattern, then you have the relax and you can do a spontaneous loop if you choose to. Makes sense? So ready? Doctor, you're board certified.
Yes.
To become board certified, this requires advanced education.
It does, yes.
This education, it takes place after medical school.
Yes, that's true.
But while you were in medical school, you did take classes.
I did.
One of these classes that you took was on how to conduct a proper medical evaluation.
Of course.
Okay, so that's like beginning. Connected loop. Each sentence begins where the last sentence ends. Reinforces the point. You're trained that a proper medical evaluation, it must be impartial.
Yes.
Okay, and if I was better prepared, I'd have a flip chart right here. The first page would be blank. I'd flip it over. On the top line, it says proper. And then I write number 1, impartial. And I take up the whole space. And then I put a number 2, causing curiosity. So the jury realizes more is coming, right? Doctor, by impartial, what we mean is that you're not an advocate for either side.
True. To be neutral.
Doctor, you're trained that a proper medical evaluation must not only be impartial, but it must also be objective.
Yes.
And notice how I pause before impartial and objective, making it stand out. And people can't, because we're on, it's a podcast, but I turn and look at my flip chart and point it with my hand so the jury looks at it. By objective, what we mean is that you don't cherry pick the evidence to support a desired opinion.
True.
Doctor, you're trained that a proper medical evaluation must not only be impartial and objective, but it must also be complete.
Yes.
By complete, what we mean is that you consider all relevant information.
Of course.
Doctor, the opposite of a proper medical evaluation, one that's impartial, objective, and complete, well, that would be a biased evaluation.
Yes, I would agree.
So, of course, we have it written out. We're teaching. We're becoming teachers. We're looping. We are also got that one whole concept on that one page. And now we've defined the right way. And it doesn't matter what type of expert we have. it's hard for the denied to be impartial, objective, and complete. And we're laying out the definition of these terms, which is different in a courtroom between an expert and a lawyer, as it would be in like a basketball game or a piano recital or a skating, whatever. And so we're defining these terms for the context of us. We have an agreement. So now comes the next chapter. Doctor, the opposite of a proper medical evaluation, one that's impartial, objective, and complete. Well, that would be the biased evaluation.
Yes.
So now I flip the chart over and it says biased at the top. Doctor, you're trained and you know that there are certain risks associated with a paid expert's choice to conduct a biased medical evaluation.
I don't know about that. I try to be unbiased.
Of course, because you know that one of those risks is that the jury could be misinformed about the patient's condition.
Yeah, that's a risk.
And so I write number 1, misinformed on my flip chart, and I put a number 2. Doctor, you're trained and you know that if a paid expert chooses to conduct a biased medical evaluation, not only could the jury be misinformed about the patient's condition, but they can also be misled as to the extent of the patient's injuries.
Yes, that's true.
So I write down number 2, misled, and I put a number 3. Doctor, you're trained and you know that if a paid expert chooses to conduct a biased medical evaluation, not only could our jury be misinformed about the patient's condition and misled as to the extent of the patient's injuries, but perhaps worst of all, they could be deceived into undervaluing the human harms and suffering that were caused.
Yes, I would agree.
So I write down number 3, deceived. So we have misinformed, misled, deceived. That's an example of stepping, right? Because if somebody's willing to misinform us, much more likely to mislead us and much more likely to deceive us. And same thing, you're trained and you know. So it's like a universal truth. So that's another example of stepping, which I learned from Clark, of course. And then here's the conclusion. Doctor, let me ask you this question. We know that's called the refocusing move, right?
Let me ask you this question.
Let me ask you this question. On December 14th, 2022, you had a choice to make. So tell us all, what did you choose to do? Now, with such a clearly vague question, any expert worth their salt is going to act with dumb, right? Like, what do you mean? Or it's very unlikely they're going to just volunteer an answer to that. So give me the typical expert, like, what do you mean?
What do you mean, counsel?
Well, what I mean is, so spontaneous loop practicing, what I mean is, did you choose to do a proper medical evaluation? One that was, and I flip my chart back over and it makes a big rustling noise, creates attention. One that was impartial, objective, and complete, like you were trained to do? Or did you choose to violate your training and conduct a bias evaluation, knowing, and I flip the chart over again, knowing all the risks?
Of course I was trying to be impartial, objective.
Of course you did, right? And so out of all the trials you ever had, Daniel, all of them, how many experts for the defense have you come across that you would say were impartial, objective, and complete? Maybe one?
Maybe one.
Maybe one. And every time you're like, if that one, you'd be shocked. But the truth is that they're not.
Right.
That they're advocates, that they cherry pick, and they can't possibly consider all the information because the defense lawyer didn't give it to them.
Right.
And so the whole idea is it raises their cortisol because it forces them to lie. And it's a foundational chapter. And I read so many crosses and people just get right into the meat. They don't lay any foundations.
Right.
So I think the foundations are key. But that chapter, and it doesn't matter if, let's say it's a biomechanics expert, you just change the risk, right? What are the risks? If the jury can be misinformed about the forces involved, and if they could be misled as the potential for injury, and then again, deceived and undervaluing, because that's what the whole goal of the defense is, isn't it?
Right.
So, what are your thoughts on that, Mr. Cross-examination?
I think it's brilliant. I think it's effective. I think it's thorough. I would only change a few words. My style is not to use the word harm or losses. My client's leg, he didn't wake up one morning and find his leg missing. Or the widow, the plaintiff in my case, in a wrongful death case, lost her husband. That's defense speak. Her husband was killed. Her husband was taken away. His leg was torn off. So it's not about losses. It's about what was taken. And what is the value of what was taken? I stay away from the words losses and harms.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Daniel, this is the end. I know we have the very busy days here, but if people need to get a hold of you in Bakersfield, if they're not coming to TLU live, and so they're going to have to meet you in person, but how do they get a hold of you?
My phone number is 661-323-1400.
And your email?
D as in dog, R at rodriguezlaw.net. Rodriguez is spelled RODRIGUEZ. By the way, if EZ in Spanish means what? Martinez, Ramirez, Hernandez. What does EZ mean? It means the son of. Like in Scandinavians, Leif Erikson, son of Eric. Right? Johnson, son of John. EZ, the meaning has gotten lost over the centuries, but that's what it meant. The son of. So Rodriguez is the son of Rodrigo. But if you spell it with an S, you come from Portugal. That's Portuguese. If you use a Q instead of a G, you're Portuguese. So Marquez versus Marquez.
Who knew? None of this did I know. None of this did I know. Now I know.
This is my thing. If you're going to practice in Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego, those might come in helpful.
Because I'm coming back to LA at the end of this year. I'm moving back from Vegas because I'm not doing a fall conference. So hope everybody enjoyed Vegas last year, but there'll be no Vegas this year because Dan Ambrose is going to the courtroom because I've been studying all this stuff so intensely for 5 years since the beginning of the pandemic. I got to put it into action, Daniel. I'm taking your advice. Right. I've already tried all those criminal cases. I got to go try some civil cases. And I have an opportunity. A good friend of mine has this small case. It's like only a $250 policy. But it's in the suburbs. Like, it's where I grew up. Like, most of the trials of felonies that I tried were in this courthouse. And the judge that we're in front of actually is we used to be friends. Like, we climbed the Red Rock Canyons when 30 years, when we were just after law school and we both got stuck at the top. In the dark. We had to rappel down in the dark. It was one of the scariest moments of my life. But anyway, so that could be the next one we're going to see, though. But if anybody needs to get a hold of me, it's dan@triallawyeruniversity.com. Or my cell is 248-808-3130. And if you're still here, if you use the code Daniel200, because that will give you the early registration price at TLU. That's the bonus for listening to this podcast and staying with us this long. And if you also said anybody wants a copy of this cross, or you don't have TLU on demand, if you shoot me an email, I'll send you a 1-month comp code so you can try it out and see all that. Because it's an app for your phone. It has an AI feature on the website now, so you can search it all. And we put all the pleadings, transcripts, and PowerPoints in for all these cases that we've shown. So that's it. Thanks for visiting, Daniel. I look forward to seeing you in Huntington Beach. It's going to be really awesome because hopefully you'll get there on Tuesdays. There's going to be some activities on Wednesday. I think you really like this Ben Rabinowitz's expert cross-examination class. I'm just a suggestion. But if you don't, there's going to be go-kart racing. Kurt Zander's taking people out to race go-karts. Ed Saramboli's taking people out to surf camp. Chad Dudley and Steve DeBoge are going to do like a pickleball outing. So there's going to be some activities that are social too, because it's important to make friends in bigger networks. So that's what we got going in Huntington Beach, June 4th through 7th.
It was a pleasure, Dan. Take care.
Thanks, Daniel.
Ready to train with the Titans and set records with your verdicts? Register for our live conferences and boot camps at triallawyeruniversity.com. Start getting your reps in before the big event by going to tluondemand.com to gain instant access to live lectures, case analysis, and skills training videos from the trial lawyer champions you love and respect, as well as pleadings, transcripts, PowerPoints, and notes for a roadmap to victory. Join the group that continues to get extraordinary results. Trial Lawyers University, produced and powered by LawPods.